to go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on another podcast of Waking Infinity. I'm your host, Ben Stewart, and today I have with me a very special guest. Her name is Maya Shetreat, Dr. Maya Shetreat. She's a neurologist, an herbalist, astrologer, urban farmer, the author of an amazing book, which I have called The Dirt Cure, Healthy Food, Healthy Gut, Happy Child, which has been translated into 10 languages. She has been featured in the New York Times, the Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, the Dr. Oz Show, and much more. Dr. Maya is the founder of the Terrain Institute, which is really interesting, where she teaches terrain medicine, earth-based programs for transformational healing. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers in Ecuador, and is a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacred. Such an amazing bio, and I love the diversity of the different backgrounds that are there. Every single one of them I have the utmost respect for. I want to launch in by asking, what is terrain medicine?
Well, terrain medicine is basically a way of looking at the world, actually, and looking at our well-being, rather than, where conventional medicine is all about dividing us up into little sections of our body, our brain, our liver, our kidney, our ear, nose, and throat, all these different parts of ourselves. And it's about looking at us as a whole terrain, and our bodies as a bioterrain, which includes all of our organ systems, and it includes our microbiome, and it includes the food that we eat, and it includes actually not just our physical body, but also our emotional terrain and our spiritual terrain. And then it also, basically, I think the definition of our health and resilience comes from our bioterrain being in alignment with our ecoterrain, which is the world around us, which is soil and sun and wind and sky and seeds and animals and living beings that are all around us. So, the idea is that that there's this alignment that we need to be living in with ourselves, with those around us, and with the land that we stand on.
Okay, so where do you see the, I guess, room for improvement today? Because you're also a neurologist. You studied well in the allopathic ways, but then I also see, and we've spoken before, we've met before and spoken about the indigenous perspective, shamanic perspectives, different ways of viewing who and what we are and how we relate to not just our health and our inner world, but also our contextual, shared, collective world. So what would you say would be the room for improvement moving into terrain medicine? Where do you think we are now in terms of global health?
I would say we're kind of in dire straits. And I think that we're learning that more than ever right now with everything that's been going on with coronavirus and this whole idea of we're all a bunch of sitting ducks, kind of. That's how I think so many people feel. Or they're in like total denial. There sort of feels like this real polarity. There's something in between that, which is there's a lesson here that whatever this entity is a teacher to us. And we're being asked to look at how we take care of our bodies and how we take care of, physical, emotional, and spiritual bodies, how we're showing up, how we're caring for ourselves and those around us, and how we are in alignment. So in that regard, I think, this isn't about turning our heads away and saying, this is nothing, it's all manufactured, because it's here, it's a teacher, this is an entity, however you want to, and I'm sure you, like I, are surrounded by many different viewpoints on what's going on, as I think most of us are right now. And, whoever's on one side of that polarity thinks that the people on the other side are complete idiots. And, there's a lot of that kind of energy going. But I think what's missing is this, this sense that we are in a an initiation period, you know, and that's a deep period of learning, a deep period of surrender. Um, and what, you know, we can't totally control it. We have to ride it out. We have to ride it through. But there are ways that we can show up. There are ways that we do have agency. So how do we have agency in a time like this? Well, how are we taking care of ourselves? And, you know, I recognize that there's privilege embedded in that statement, you know, and that brings me to the next part, which is how are we taking care of those around us? You
Right.
know, these are simple ways that, you know, so for me, you know, this whole idea of terrain medicine is not something doctors just practice, you know, or healthcare providers, but it's any person, all of us, right? In the way that in indigenous culture, we'll talk about bird medicine, or we'll talk about like hummingbird medicine, you know, or we'll talk of cedar tree medicine, or we'll talk of, you know, wind medicine. This is terrain medicine, is how are we engaging with the entities around us, and how are we showing up?
That's very interesting because when you mention bird medicine, what was the other, the wind medicine, there's certain things that I've noticed once I got quite a bit more connected to nature. And I can't really claim that any one thing helped me connect more with nature. Plant medicines were a part of it. Meditation was a part of it, but also my addiction to music was a big part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like the thing that I feel when I do research on indigenous perspectives, and what I kind of notice when I go outside and walk barefoot, or not just have the wind blowing on me, but listen in a way. And using that word listen, when I'm walking, let's say through the woods, and I do take my shoes off, I'm listening with my feet. And there's a certain kind of presence it's softer, it's much more sensitive, but it's also, it's aware of things that might seem like a bigger deal than they really are. You mentioned inflammatory polar or dual ideas of the world, where I come from a conspiracy background, where I've made a couple conspiracy films and then ended them with a lot more of finger pointing within, you know, like, yes, we can look at these external realities with such awe and amazement that we forget that of our agency, of the things we do have control over. And while I think it's healthy to be able to entertain alternative views on what's going on in the world, I feel for the most part, people aren't calling themselves to a high enough level. Usually when people are disgusted with, let's say, the wealth gap or whatever it might be in the world, it tends to put people, or it tends to bring out a part of people that maybe is the disgust they feel, or the, you know, the energy, in a sense, almost mirroring the thing that they dislike that's happening in the world, so they don't go into alignment. And if you would, could you explain maybe the nuance of what that means? Alignment with what? And, you know, how can we journey more into alignment?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about mirroring, because that's what I see so often in these you know, dualism is a reality. And even, you know, as one of my spiritual teachers um, said with kind of a snicker, like people who say that there's no duality, you know, and don't believe or are only into the concept of non-duality, or creating a duality between non-duality, those who believe in non-duality and duality, you know, in other words, duality is a reality, you know, even as we explore it as a spectrum, you know, and we want to extract ourselves from that too. And I think the whole concept of questioning and stepping outside of our perceived reality is incredibly important. It's a foundational, you know, way of coming to any situation, coming in beginner's mind, and, you know, not just coming as obedient kind of, you know, an obedient sort of servant to whatever is being fed to us. I think that is dangerous, really. Coming in beginner's mind is actually a very, indigenous way of looking at all situations. So there is that. And I think that also there's very much an idea of everything that's around us is a mirror of what's within us. So if there's things in the world around us that disgust us, then the first step is to look within and do inward healing. And I have seen this. I don't like to point fingers, but sometimes like I'll find that if, like, let's say I have an interaction, this has happened in the last few months, that someone who was vegan got online, kind of came after me in some way, and got so nasty, and I wasn't even really engaging, but like, commented like on, my body and my intellect, and like, oh, just the no, like really a way, like the kind of nastiness. And it was sort of interesting because they're like, well, you have no compassion, because you eat meat. But then there was this whole like no compassion for the other human, or coming with like the sense of respect, like let's respectfully engage. And so I think it's interesting, just like we can do a lot of displacing of or projecting of things that are within us to what's around us. What does alignment mean? Well, for me, alignment, so I think that we have one main purpose. Human beings have one main purpose in being in this world. The main purpose is to come in a state of appreciation and gratitude and respect. That is our main purpose, our service, to be in service. So when we have that sense and we're in that space, we are on our way to being in alignment. This is a practice, it's a discipline, it's something that takes work every day. It's not something like, oh, I'm there, I made it. It's a practice, it's lifelong. And it's something that can always grow. It can always become more and better and deeper and richer. But, and there's a lot of science, actually, I think, which I teach in my institute, behind this idea of how can we be in alignment in a state of gratitude, appreciation, and service.
I love that. And there's a couple questions that wondering what rabbit hole we could go down in, because those sciences, I'm sure you've heard of heart math, and maybe that's part of what the heart coherence, flow states, understanding that we have a bit more agency by accessing our nervous system through simple things like the breath, meditation, things that you wouldn't imagine it would be that simple. We're always told that the solutions to our problems must be complex and somebody else must have that answer. And like just to respond a little bit to what you were saying earlier, when I first made my films, I got such a backlash, and I never expected the kind of backlash I would get. And I never really cared when somebody was a little rude, but they were making a really good point. But when somebody it didn't seem like there was any attempt for harmony. Even if they have like a fundamentally different view in the world, there was no attempt for harmony. And I had, what's funny is when I was working at Gaia, there was a producer there, Sid Goldberg, and he traveled to India a lot. And there was a guru that he spoke to one time, and he said, well, a lot of people get upset with me when I tell the truth. Should we always be telling the truth to people? And he was like, assuming you know what the truth is. And I kind of feel that I call it college kid syndrome. When people learn a bunch of stuff, they're the noisiest about it. And when you have, let's say, 10 years of researching something or more, you're not so noisy, or you're more specific with, I guess, the messaging, specific with the way that you put it. And so I would get a lot of people online, and I realized that there's a certain demographic of people that were just jabbing. There was nothing constructive about it. It was almost like a a display of how they feel they have control in the world. And then there were others that were scared because, like I said, I was talking about some pretty uncomfortable truths in my first few films. And there were people that were scared, and they were coming with a slightly different energy. And I noticed that there are people that wish to listen, and then having that discernment for knowing, who am I speaking to? Because the internet is a very nebulous thing. People come to us in so many ways. So I guess what I'm getting at is I kind of feel like right now we're in quarantine. This is the perfect time to speak with you. I've heard a lot about terrain, the terrain theory, Bechamp, and then like the pasture. Do you know that story with Bechamp?
Yeah, I wrote about it in my book.
Well, maybe you can share it with the audience just in case people don't know about that, but also how that, in a sense, may have scripted the way people think reality is. I know you kind of touched upon that, but maybe just like show the discernment between the two theories and how one became science and the other became its cousin that's left in the closet, it seems.
Right. So, we know a lot about Louis Pasteur because he is the father of pasteurization, which most of us, at least in the United States and in a lot of the rest of the world too, drink pasteurized milk because there was this idea that there are these germs. So he also, basically is the father of germ theory. And germ theory really just says that there are these invisible organisms, or invisible to the naked eye organisms that basically are all around us. And when one of them gets into our body and reproduces, out of control, then they can make us sick and potentially kill us. That's a very simplified version of germ theory. And so at the same time that that Louis Pasteur had kind of propagated this theory, he actually had, and there are a few different people, but it's actually, he had colleagues who maybe we would call them frenemies, who had competing ideas. And one of them was Claude Bernard. And Claude Bernard actually had a competing theory. His theory was called the terrain theory. And the terrain theory basically said most organisms that cause problems for us are actually that are in our own bodies. And when our bodies become weaker or are, in some way out of balance, those organisms can cause problems for us. But the rest of the time, those organisms are actually a normal part of our ecosystem. And so it turns out in this story, it's a very dramatic story, and I've looked quite a bit into, is it true, is it not true, because it's so dramatic, but basically kind of on his deathbed, Louis Pasteur is said to have said, to have recounted his theory essentially that, the germ is nothing, terrain is everything, so.
Did he say why?
No, not in this story.
Okay.
So it's even more dramatic when you say it in French, but I'm not going to do that. So anyway, so, but the idea here is now we know, because, okay, let's go back to when germ theory actually kind of became a thing. The pendulum swung so far in the direction of germs are scary and terrible that sourdough bread and yogurt were actually banned because they were considered to be contaminated, and we got into this idea of being sterile and being, that hygiene sort of became this whole idea of being equivalent to being sterile. And so I wrote a book called The Dirt Cure, as you know, and in The Dirt Cure, I really wanted to show all this science that's out there that basically demonstrates that microbial diversity, that being exposed to germs is actually really, really important for our immune systems, that our immune systems are actually social and friendly in a sense, and want to meet and greet all different kinds of organisms and compounds and, foods and microbes and just all the things that kind of come through the body, and then as it does that, it's really able to distinguish which things are potentially harmful and which things are actually not a problem at all. And so what's happened though is that we've lost that, we really lost that idea for a long time, and decided that being sterile was the best thing. And now even as we've learned that having a diverse microbiome through contact with other people, through contact with nature, through contact with pets, is actually critical to our immune health and our overall health, our brain health, our, endocrine health, everything. Here we are now in quarantine, in this idea that, we need to douse ourselves in hand sanitizer, put bleach all over us, don't come into contact with anybody else, and stay out of nature, So we're like really backsliding in a certain sense. In the short term, perhaps quarantine can be beneficial, but in a long-term sense, it's certainly harmful to our immune systems and hurts our own way of protecting ourselves.
Yeah, it really feels like, so the idea of germ theory, it just kind of seems like what it has done to me when I look back on it, because I also see my own childhood growing up with that idea in mind that, my hands are dirty and I need to wash them before I do anything type of thing. And usually nowadays it's only when I touch like the pump at a gas station or something that might have petrochemicals or something that's more man-made that I'm more worried about. But I guess what it seems to me is that it almost takes away our sense of having some kind of, I wouldn't even say control, but I guess agency in our immunity to the outside world, that the idea is you need to look out. And now the interesting thing with this scenario that we're going through is I feel like there's always, even mythologically, psychologically, archetypally, we always have some kind of boogeyman or something that we need to protect against. And there's something about that I think is also, it turns and it keeps consciousness fresh. The virus all the way to the boogeyman, it keeps us alert in some way, but then we always take it a little bit farther to the extreme, because then we don't want to have to think about it anymore. And so we kind of set up these layers in between it, and then we don't question these things. And that's when it becomes a part of our framework for thinking that if something that's invisible, oh no, I was just at the store and that person coughed and now I remember it, but I didn't, oh my God, I need to get it off me type of feeling. Do you think that is there any truth to that? Should we be worried at all? Should there be some balance of it? Because we hear that, hygiene is obviously very important, but where do you draw the line as far as what is obsessive compulsive behavior that people are portraying? And do we have a systematic household everywhere across the world type of phobia of these things?
I mean, even prior to this period of quarantine and our sort of new normal that we're in now, there has been this idea of sterile equals healthy. And there's all this data, that I wrote about that actually really contradicts that approach. I mean, if you're cutting me open on, in the OR, I want it to be sterile,
Right.
But
not at a meat market.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, washer, all of that kind of stuff. But when it comes to, your home, when it comes to, living with your normal protection, you have your skin, you have your, we have a very beautiful, complex, effective system, actually, of encountering things in the outside world, in our terrain, in our external eco-terrain. And there is this chemistry, in a sense, that happens, this alchemy that happens. And it's an education again and again and again for our bodies. And that's why, like, for example, if you're a child and you grow up in a home with pets, you're actually less likely to have allergies, because there's this complex microbiome that is different from yours, that creates a collective microbiome that is unique and more diverse than you would have otherwise had. And diversity is actually, as in the ecosystem, as in the forest, as in the soil, as with us, having a diverse ecosystem, a diverse microbiome is really, really, really important for our very social, very interested immune systems. On the other hand, this is another interesting study that I think is very relevant. If you, kids who live in homes or go to schools where bleach is used regularly, they actually have a higher risk of developing chronic respiratory illnesses like bronchitis. This is published from a few years ago. It's a European study. And obviously Clorox is not like that study, but it's published and it's a really nicely done study actually. So you know, there's evidence that shows that our immune systems are healthier, more balanced, and better when we have more exposure to microbes. And you know, when people ask me what's the difference between a germ and a microbe, I say germ is just a pejorative term for microbe. Now, let's translate that to right now, where there's this novel organism, you know, and maybe it's something our bodies haven't seen and, you know, all of that. So what can we really do about it? Well, washing your hands with soap is always great. I don't have any qualms about people washing their hands with soap on a regular basis. Do I think we should be dousing everything in bleach, you know, and covering ourselves in hand sanitizer? Well, hand sanitizer in many cases actually is, you know, has other components in it that are actually toxic, that in some, you know, places, including in this country, in the US, they've actually banned some of those because they were so harmful. So that's like a concern. But, you know, I think even in addition to that, what can we be doing to build our immune systems is actually working to make our immune systems more, you know, engaging, essentially, is strengthening to our immune systems, having good nutrition, you know, eating good foods that are, you know, nutrient dense, nourishes our gut, our immune system. Sometimes taking certain vitamins or supplements if we think we don't have enough of that, using botanicals, working with botanicals. These are the kinds of things that we can be doing to bring kind of nature from our eco-terrain into our bioterrain, and aligning and doing that kind of aligning. That basically is, that's where we have agency. That's where we have the strengths to, you know, really come up against, quote unquote, right? I mean, what else do we have? We can't all hole up in our homes. And frankly, which is not safe for other reasons for many people, and maybe for a lot of people, for other reasons, but also, you know, even if you are holed up in your home or your apartment or wherever you are, people are still contracting this. You know, they're still saying that, you know, I haven't been anywhere. I'm not doing anything. I haven't been in contact with any person. And here I am, you know, on week 3 of these symptoms that I got, and I'm positive. So we have to think about our terrain. We have to think about what can we do to strengthen ourselves from the inside out and to be in alignment.
Okay, so you're mentioning terrain, and before you gave this beautiful idea of the eco terrain as well. Plants, animals, the dirt, the trees, the phytochemicals we get from it, fresh air, sunlight. Most people nowadays, especially the time of the year, it's starting to get to the point where people are coming out of their winter hibernation a lot more. But for the most part, a lot of people have been spending, I haven't seen any solid numbers on the rise in media consumption, because we're also talking about the mind as well. Mm-hmm. But we're also around technology, and we do know that there is EMF radiation that comes from technology. I've looked into this extensively, and I also feel that there's people that go too far to the extreme and those I wouldn't even say too far. They're the ones that are meant to go to the extreme and speak about what's happening on the fringe. But I kind of see it as also, it's like, I would definitely like it if the EMFs weren't 100 million times more than our grandparents had. However, I also realize that I've been maintaining my health. I'm 37 now. I've been increasing my forms of dynamic movement, my relationship with nature, my diet, my mind coming into a lot more balance. And I notice absolutely no effects from any of my technology. For the most part, I'm editing a film, I'm touching a computer all day long. I've been doing this for well over a decade. There may be some residual effects, but I feel like, I take cold showers every single morning. I really do. I'm on the pursuit of better health and what I have control over, my actions, the things that I put in my body, on my body, in my mind. And so the terrain has changed. We're in quarantine, and I would love for you to be able to give some kind of silver lining. What can we do in this kind of an eco terrain to at least mitigate some of what could be a negative effect of being indoors a lot more often, being on technology a lot more often?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places we could go with that. And as always, um, a few things that I would say. One is that, I think there's even more than things like EMFs and all of that. I mean, I think our consumption of technology and social media is really, the way I think about it is, we're dressed and doused in fear. And whether it's, whatever your view of what's happening, there's a lot of fear and agitation. And I like, when I talk about the emotional terrain or the spiritual terrain, we don't have a lot of vocabulary around that. And we don't have a lot of experience in taking it seriously, I think, in our society. But what I would say is, the way I like to kind of compare it to something we can imagine is, imagine being sprayed by a skunk. Whoever has had that happen to them or a pet, or, it's not something that it happens and then it's just over and that's gone. You know what I mean? There's a whole process because it sticks to you. It stays with you. You might never wear those clothes again, or, you're going to have to wash yourself or your pet, let's say, people have all kinds of, wash them in tomatoes. So, I mean, it's a whole thing. And so if you think of skunk spray as sort of a physical manifestation of fear, of an emotion, and now it's all over you, it's stuck to you. We're walking around bathing in that all the time. And there are practices to cleaning ourselves of that, which, I teach people, and I've been taught, so it's not something that just goes away. So here we are bathing essentially in fear and agitation. And so there are just certain practices like turn off the goddamn computer. You know what I mean? That's like one simple step. And don't look at your phone, like put it on airplane mode or turn it off, or, really taking time to do something different. And it can be so many different things. I mean, it can be, I don't think you have to be able to go outside in order to engage with nature, engage with the earth. You can sit with a beautiful stone. You can take water, and just gaze into the water and meditate like that. You can take a bath, or a shower and just literally wash it off of you. You can, look out the window, or open your window. And I know, again, this is not always true for every single person. You can sit with a plant. You can actually, if you have aromatic herbs like rosemary or mint or basil or things you can buy in the grocery store, or even things you can gather wild in some cases in a park or, in your own yard. And you can either take a bundle of them and brush yourself off with them. And on my website at drmaya.com, I have a free video of how to do a plant limpia, like a plant cleaning of yourself. You could do that in your home. You know what I mean? So there are very, very simple things that we can do to engage with our eco-terrain. You can sit with an actual plant. I have an ayahuasca plant that grows in my house. I have numerous plants, but I sit with those plants and I just, you know, to say meditate, I kind of commune with those plants and I just, you know, sit with them. I could be meditating, I could be singing, I could be playing an instrument, you know, there are a lot of different things. So I think we have to really, that's part of caring for our terrain, you know? And as far as, you know, I do want to comment on something, you know, we can certainly strengthen our terrain. And we do have agency there. I don't think that's a foolproof, you know, this is not, you know, I don't like to be smug about things. I don't like to be glib about things. Like, real things happen to people, even when they take good care of themselves. You know, people can do all the things and still be sensitive to EMFs or still get sick or still any of those things. And that's part of the journey. You know what I mean? That's part of the journey. So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to frame this in any way, shape, or form as I have the answer. But I do think that this is where our attention is being called right now, to how can we be in better alignment with ourselves, each other, and the place that we're in, you know, our land, with the earth. That, I think, is the closest to the truth that we can get, and we can do all the things. And then we just stay open and stay in beginner's mind and walk the journey.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I really feel, I've noticed, and I always have to check myself. You know, my journey is rather interesting because I really like looking at everything that's out there and coming up with integrative, integrative ideas of what reality is, how I engage with it. And it always comes back to how I show up in the world. But I also know that we're swimming in a sea of a collective of people. And like you said, everybody has different sensitivities to things. And, you know, I kind of feel the terrain and also the inner terrain and the outer terrain. I feel that for the most part, a lot of the times we're looking for just the answer. Like, can you just tell me what the answer is so I can stay healthy and keep away from, I feel like emotionally what a lot of people are asking is like, how do I stay healthy amidst all the stuff that I know about and don't know about, and maybe the stuff that I think I know about, but I'm wrong about. It's such sometimes it feels like it's a million-mile journey up a mountain. But really, I kind of feel like what I'm sensing from you is that there is no one way, and not anybody has all the answers. And that's also part of the beauty of our diversity. You were mentioning the diversity in our microbiome, but I'm just finishing up a film with Pete Evans, who we met, you know, on a journey where we were filming this one film. And in that, there's a guy from Philo's Biosciences that just shows what happens to industrial crops, the big mega crops, the diversity of those types of crops like corn and soy. There used to be, let's say, hundreds or maybe thousands of varieties, and now down to dozens. And there's something that happens to these crops where that makes them a lot more susceptible to whatever strains of viruses or pests. There's something about that, the loss of our diversity. Can you speak about that, or is there any like lateral integration you can make from that, the beauty of our diversity, and how we can kind of look at this time right now? We do, concerts are going online, you know, there's a lot of things that are being moved online. All these, you know, screenings that I had for films, now they're all virtual. This is a part of our world right now. And how could we, I guess, stay in alignment with a collective of people that we're meeting online. If the social media is our platform for the most part, and podcasts are the ways that people who really are desperate for answers are getting them, how can we honor that? How can we take an indigenous perspective into this digital world, and really view this as, maybe prime territory for our awakening? Do you see any of those kinds of silver linings to this right now, like as being a really perfect place for an awakening?
I mean, well, I would say, if you think about, for example, um, what in an indigenous community, might be ceremony, some ceremonial, dieta, let's say, some way that you're engaging with the plants, some of the teacher plants. There is this journey within. And in that journey, and we've talked about this, there is a sense that you can't run, you can't hide, and that there's no escaping whatever you're there to see and learn. And it can feel very chaotic. It can feel, people can feel like they learn very specific things that are said to them, or it can be, I have no idea what that meant. It was terrifying, or it was wonderful. The point is, though, that there is, you have no real control over how that journey goes, but you're there for it. You're showing up for it. That's all. And I think what's happening right now is, and I would say there is a kind of death, temporary death, that happens where your ego kind of dies and you become part of this collective thing, this collective consciousness. But you yourself, as you were, and there's a lot of really interesting neuroscience around this, which as a neurologist, I like to geek out about, but there's this, you as you usually are, and maybe as you were before, you can't come back from that in exactly the same way. There is a death that happens and a rebirth. That is part of that journey. So I'm not answering your question exactly, but I think what's happening right now is that we're in such a period where we're facing our a real loss of our egos. I think we're certainly in the US, and I don't think it's unique to the US, but the US may be kind of the most extreme, but this sense of exceptionalism. It won't happen to me, and nothing will happen to me. We're too powerful. We're too advanced. We're too technological. We're too, and then we're looking at our health system breaking down. We're looking at our government breaking down. We're looking at our food system breaking down. We're looking at our education system breaking down. And we are in that period there is a death period. And I don't even mean the physical death. I mean, that is happening for some people, of course. But there is an ego death that's happening for all of us right now. And there is a death of the world that we were in before. And from my perspective, and I think I'm not alone in this perspective, there are a lot of things about that world that actually do need to die. When I'm looking, for example, at the food system, I don't want anyone to go hungry. I don't want there to be, people who are harmed by our food system breaking down, but our food system is totally messed up. That's an understatement. When we're looking at the meat and the way animals are being raised, and we're seeing, the slaughterhouses are closed down. Now we're going to slaughter 2 million chickens and do nothing with them. I have my own chickens that lay eggs. And I right now in this very room have, adorable little chicks here, and each of them has a personality, and I hold them and I interview, So the point is that we have this death that's happening that hopefully, in our awakening can become a respect for life and a sense of how can we do this better. And it might not happen immediately because we always want to rush the hard part, I should say. and get to the good part. Like, what's the meaning of this? And I think we can all see that there's a lot of potential meaning, and it's our choice if we choose to, you know, confront that and be aware of that and engage with that and fight for that. And so what does that mean for us as a collective? It means that we try to show up in a good way. It means that we are open to each other. It means that we try to be compassionate with each other. It means that we come in gratitude and as much kindness as we can. And that's hard, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard. And when we're in stress and we're fearful and we're anxious, and that could be, you know, have nothing to do with virus. It could be, how am I going to pay my freaking bills? Am I going to be able to feed my family? You know, am I going to be able to, right? We're not, you know, the US in particular, and I think we are the worst, again, as developed countries go. I mean, we're not really helping people very much at all, where other countries are really kind of trying to come through and say, okay, you don't have to pay rent, you don't have to pay mortgage, you know, we're going to cover 80% of your salary, you know, all these different things. The US, we're kind of like, oh, like, see what you can do. Okay, you know, and it does create desperation, does create fear and anxiety and a lot of different things that even have nothing to do with, you know, there's some germ out there that's going to get me. It's so much greater than that. So you know, as far as how can we digitally stay connected, I mean, what we're learning is there are things that we have to physically, you know, we may have to quarantine because the law demands it or because we believe we should, or any number of those things. But, you know, speaking of heart math, speaking of electromagnetic fields, which we all have, you know, there is no, you know, physical distancing of our love for each other, our compassion for each other, our kindness, listening, as you know, brought up. These are things that have no boundaries, have no, you know, they're not encased by the walls of our home. So that's where I start. You know what I mean? I don't have all the answers of how technology is going to change this for us. I think very unique. If I look at the astrology of this, especially, I mean, I think we're in a very unique time. That's very, very rare. And we're going to see really unexpected and, you know, unexpected things are going to happen to our economy, to how we interact with the earth, and to technology and how we use technology and how technology becomes a part of our everyday lives totally differently. And I think there's going to be a lot of genius and brilliance, and for the good and for maybe not the good, you know, at least as far as I'm going to perceive it. So I think we're only at the very beginning of that journey.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I wonder if we shouldn't get you back on the podcast at some point to talk about the astrology. I wish we had time, because that sounds. I've been studying black swan events and also how that correlates with right now, this time period. There's this thing called the saculum. Every 90 years, the Etruscans would measure not in 100-year increments, but crisis moment to crisis moment. And 90-year increments, just about, from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to World War II, Great Depression to right now. And I do think that these are almost reset moments where the way we come out of this period is almost like coming off of a fast. It's really important. How do we show up coming out of this period? Probably is really good for us to be able to set the tone for the next chapter for ourselves, knowing that we are coming with some kind of agency, whatever that is. I guess if the terrain, if we can't see it and it's covered in clouds and everything like that, then I guess the way we walk forward is with all the tools we do have at our disposal. And many of them, you were mentioning some of them with the Waira and the Limpia, the type of cleansing. This has a lot to do with, you know, the way we are engaging with ourselves as well, with our mind and our body in one activity, and being centered in that. So I guess without going too far, I want to give you a chance maybe to reply to that. We only have a few minutes left, but I was wondering, is there something for you moving forward that you think people can step out of this pattern, this quarantine, into whatever the next world is? Something that you're offering that can really help either make sense of or equip people with the tools to move forward in an intelligent way, no matter what the future scenario might be.
Yeah, I think that we have responsibility to become leaders in whatever way that may look for us. It doesn't mean, becoming the president of the United States for most people, but I believe that we empathic, sensitive, compassionate people, it's our time to step up into roles of leadership, all kinds of leadership, artistic leadership, political leadership, economic leadership, when I talk about compassion, I talk about love, and I talk about, listening and all those things, I don't want it, I think a lot of those things are perceived as weak. And I want to be clear that this is not actually, I don't consider it in that way. I think it's just that they are strengths. And I think that we need to, as people who are sensitive and compassionate and want to be heart-led leaders, which is what the world is calling for right now, that's our role, to stand in that strength. So, what I created actually was a program, a certification program for people to walk through becoming heart-led leaders to build a more compassionate world that works with earth-based practices and indigenous wisdom, both my own family's from Morocco and the Atlas Mountains, and from what I've learned from different elders I've learned with over the years, who have given me permission to share some of this information and some of these practices. That's what I offer people is, how can we be in alignment, but also then do that inner work and then step forward as heart-led leaders to build that more compassionate world that's calling to be built.
I love it. I love it. And I don't think there's any better way to end on that note. How do people get in touch with you? How do they find you, and how do they get involved?
They can go to my website, which is drmaya.com, drmaya.com, and look at my certification program. That's one option. I'm also on Instagram and pretty active there, Dr. Maya Shetreat. And I am finally creating a YouTube channel now with a lot of content about plants and herbs and terrain, and maybe there'll be some little rants here and there about some of the stuff we just talked about.
Yes.
So yeah, all of those ways.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I know that I follow you on Instagram, and I love some of the just some of the text bars that you put up there. They're really, really witty, very thought-provoking. So yes, definitely everybody find her on Instagram, find her on her website. And I just want to thank you for how you're showing up in this time and what you've dedicated yourself and your role to in this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for joining us for the Waking Infinity podcast, and please join us next time. You will see this posted on everything that you just heard, posted on the show notes, and hope that you guys are doing well at home in quarantine. Make sure you give this a couple listens so you can hear some of the nuggets that you can research on your own. I know my folks like to do their own research, so thank you guys very much, and we'll catch you next time.